Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Spurs beating City is nothing new, but this 1-0 win felt different. Where usually Spurs somewhat ride their luck against City, this was a comfortable and somewhat dominant win, especially without the ball, with Spurs winning on XG. So what did Spurs do tactically to make City look so toothless? And what's going wrong with City as of late? We'll find out in this video. City had most of the ball, so we'll look at what they did in possession and how Spurs nullified them. In possession, City built up with a back three as they usually do, with the only difference being that Lewis would come off the left-hand side today instead of right back, and move alongside Rodri, with Silva and Alvarez ahead of them. And where usually Spurs sit off of City in the build-up phase, today they were brave and looked to press City whenever it favoured them. This was because firstly they had a front three who would be perfectly positioned to press the City back three when they were on the ball. And in the midfield, they would technically be a man down, but they were brave enough to continue to press the double pivot either way, as they knew that if their press was well coordinated enough, even if a pivot got onto the ball, there would be so much pressure it would be difficult to find a man between the lines. In addition, by having a back three and the extra centre back, they could potentially commit one of the defenders between the lines if necessary. For the most part, this will force City backwards, but one of the outballs they did have, which was more successful, was Haaland looking to drop between the lines and receive intricate passes from Ederson, which did happen on a couple of occasions, although Romero was ultra aggressive as usual, and for the most part was able to slow down the play, but he was walking a fine line, eventually getting sent off. And of course, the same press is what led to the Spurs goal, so it was mission accomplished for Conte. So here we see the City back three, and Rodri and Lewis in the midfield. Spurs' front three then look to push onto the back three to force them backwards, whilst this is backed up by Højbjerg and Bentancur. Running the same play on, every City man is picked up, but with both pivots high, it means there's a fair bit of space in this region. So Haaland can receive, but he's quickly closed down. And it's also important to note that where Bernardo was dropping deep, Dyer is following up. For the goal, it's a similar situation, with City's back three being pressed by Spurs' front three, whilst Bentancur and Højbjerg are aggressive. Again, Spurs are aggressive with their centre-backs, as when Bernardo drops to be the extra man, Dyer is comfortable pushing high up. We see the same thing here as Alvarez drops and Perisic, who's rotated with Davis, also drops, and with more pressure from Davis, it's a man-to-man situation. Again, the pressure makes decision-making more difficult, leading to Rodri playing in Lewis, who's under a lot of pressure, leading to Kane scoring. But even when City were high up, the shape was roughly the same, with a 3, then a 2. But where usually we see City play with 2 men in the half space, looking to pin the defense back, instead, Silva was more of an attacking midfielder, with Alvarez either joining Haaland in a genuine front two, but more often it would be a lopsided shape, with Alvarez still operating in the right-hand half space. So the key for Spurs was having a coordinated press. When Kane would press, it was essential that Son and Kulusevski backed this up, with Højbjerg and Bentancur following in, as we've seen previously, as this would make finding the man between the lines difficult. On the rare occasions where the Spurs front three did press and it wasn't immediately backed up, a City pivot would get on the ball, then eventually a Spurs man would have to press, and these were the scenarios where Silva or later De Bruyne were able to get between the lines and look to push up the pitch. But again, having an extra man was helpful, as they could quickly look to close down this space. One thing to note that we'll come on to a lot more is that in previous seasons where they had pacey wingers, they could more confidently attack these gaps created, so teams were more reluctant to push a man up. So here's a scenario where Walker is on the ball with no pressure on him, but Bentancur is still looking to close down Rodri, so this opens up the passing lane into Bernardo. So now he's in behind and can look for a more dangerous pass, although nothing comes of this. So one great thing that Spurs did is that when they did choose to sit off of City, the front three was not spread out like this, but instead both Son and Kulusevski operated narrow, helping to cut off the pivots. And the front three looking to cover Lewis and Rodri would mean that Bentancur and Højbjerg could operate deeper, looking to pick up Silva and Alvarez. So one reason that Pep might have used Silva centrally instead of in the half spaces is that in these scenarios, when men dropped, Spurs could potentially follow them man for man. So instead, by keeping Alvarez high in the half space and having Silva central, but often looking to help overload this right-hand half space, is that Silva could essentially use Alvarez as a shield, as he would prevent Davies from pushing up to press him, leaving the potential for Silva to receive in these interesting spaces. But Spurs quickly developed solutions for this, as what we often saw is that firstly, the winger would look to apply pressure onto the wide centre-back to make that passing lane more difficult. Add to this that in these phases, Kane would drop slightly deeper onto a midfielder, opening up the potential for Betancourt to pick up the man deeper. Or, if Kane had moved across, Højbjerg could then operate deeper to help patrol this region. So Bernardo's operating in behind, and Kulusevski and Kane are helping to pick up the midfield. So when running the play on, we see that Kane is now picking up Lewis, and Betancourt is the free man helping to cover that passing lane. Add to that the narrow midfield means that Højbjerg can also be slightly deeper as cover for Bernardo. There were the occasional situations where City were able to find Bernardo Silva, but City's passing was fairly slow, allowing Spurs to adjust. But a key area for Spurs was focusing on something that City have struggled on throughout the season. By protecting the centre, it meant that the only outlets were out wide, and when they had a back five, Perisic and Emerson could be man-to-man. Firstly, even getting the pass out to the wingers could be difficult, as when the centre-backs were in this shape, when the ball went wider to one of them, the winger would be able to press, helping to cover the passing lane into the winger. But even if the ball did go wide, if the wingback was aggressive, they could make it difficult for the man to turn and play more dangerous passes. Although Grealish did have some success in this match. But one problem with City's wingers at the moment is that neither of them are off-the-ball wingers. So that means wingbacks are quite confident in dropping deep with them, knowing that firstly, they don't have the pace to potentially run in behind and exploit that space. In addition, although both Mahrez and Grealish are good dribblers, teams are more confident in leaving their men one-to-one with them, as compared to the Sane and Sterling era, for example, as these two struggle to get past their man in most situations. This winger situation has another knock-on effect in deeper build-up. Having less pacey wingers means that City's secret weapon, which is Ederson's long passing range, is much less effective, as even when he does play it into the space, the winger is unlikely to be able to get on the end of this. And this is part of the reason why teams can much more confidently look to press City. So essentially, the wide areas have a lot less threat. So Pep looked to adapt, and the first way was by playing with an ultra-wide back three with Ake and Walker extremely wide. In the second half, this was to allow some overlapping from both men, but in the first, it was just to allow the potential access for the pass to the winger to still be on. With the double pivot, it could still be a somewhat okay shape. However, City looked really vulnerable when they lost the ball, as there would be masses of space for Spurs to attack. And this could be made even worse when Spurs were able to shift City's shape to one side of the pitch, allowing the wingback to potentially be free for a switch. To make matters worse, at times, City got caught in the transition from a back four to a back three, so Lewis was still somewhat wide, and the back three had shifted across. So if City lost the ball in this situation, there were even bigger gaps to attack, with Lewis not able to help by clogging up the centre on the transition. So here we see an example where City were attacking high, and we can see how wide the back three is in this scenario, while Rodri and Lewis are central. So now when the play breaks down, there are massive gaps to attack, and it's only a poor pass that stops City being punished. Overall, this match should be sending major warning signs to Pep, who once again needs to innovate to get City out of this slump. Most say that it is this season where City have started to look lethargic, but weirdly enough, even last season, despite winning the title, they did have many matches like this where they looked turgid. For the managerial tactical scores, Conte/Stellini were in complete control in and out of possession, and should have won by more, meaning they earn an 8. City were pretty lethargic, struggling to carve out any chances, so Pep only earns a 4. But what are your ratings? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. so head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.